In this video, I want to have a look at distance time graphs with variable speed. So this is what we started looking at when we looked at distance time graphs, when we introduced them, was graphs that look like this and they have straight line segments. Now the problem with these sorts of graphs in reality is that objects don't move like that. It doesn't instantly start at 20 kilometers an hour and travel at exactly 20 kilometers an hour and then instantly stop and then instantly start moving again. Things change gradually. So if this graph were actually drawn, it might start something like this, where it's increasing speed and then it slows down, and we can have a horizontal section where it's stopped, but then it's changing gradually again. So we've got these curved lines instead of just straight line segments joined together, and then gradually coming to a stop again. So this is the sort of graphs that I want to have a look at in this video, is these curved ones, and have a look at how we can describe how an object is moving over time. Okay, so this is our first graph. So we've got distance on this axis and time on this one, and we can see how our object is moving, and we want to describe that motion. Now, because we don't have exact times, we can only do it in fairly general sense. But like we were saying when we introduced distance time graphs, the steepness of our line tells us how fast an object is going. So in this section, it's moving fairly slowly, and then it starts to increase as we go around that curve. It starts to increase in speed, and then it starts to flatten out a little bit again. So it starts decreasing, and in this section along the top, the line is flat, so the gradient is 0, which means that our object has stopped. So we've got that written here. Now, if we had more information, if we had, for example, the time here, we could call that T1, we could call this one here, we could call that T2, and we could call the end point here, we could call that time 3. We could also have actual times of the day there, for example. And if we had more information, we could put that into our sentence to make it more descriptive. So we can say it starts moving slowly, then increases its speed at T1, so that's sort of where that curve kicks in and it starts getting faster, before slowing down at T2 and eventually stopping at T3. So the more information you're given, the more information your answer is expected to have. All right, so we've got a second example here. Now, one of the first things you might notice is that our objects in our first example and our second example are traveling in the opposite directions. Now, if we were given context to what was moving and where it was moving to and from, we should put that in here as well. So for example, if this is a person walking or running away from home, then you would write that they're moving away slowly, whereas this one might be somebody moving towards home and eventually arriving at home. But we don't have that for now, so all we can do is describe how it's moving. So we can see here this first part of the graph is actually quite steep. So they start moving fairly quickly, but then they slow down and it actually becomes horizontal here. So they start moving quickly, it slows down, and then it starts picking up speed again until we're getting to this steeper part of the graph where it's actually going quite fast. And then it slows back down towards the end until it eventually stops. So when I've written that out, it is a little bit tricky because we don't have more information. So what I've said is the object starts moving quickly, but then slows down briefly and briefly stops not long into the journey. So I had to put that not long into the journey because I don't actually know how far it's been, but it is pretty close to the start. Then I've said that it continues moving and it increases in speed until it gets towards the end of its journey, so about here, when it starts slowing down again and then eventually stops. So like I said, the more detail that your diagram has, the more detail your answer should have. All right, so that's having a look at distance time graphs where the speed is variable.